Car guys only want one thing, and it's disgusting. Horsepower. Yuck. But what if I were to tell you that adding horsepower isn't the best way to make your car faster? Today we're talking about suspension and why I think it's more important than adding power. I convinced my boss to spend thousands of dollars on suspension components for my personal catfish. I could have put a supercharger on the car, but oh no, we're gonna go fast by going low. Let's go.
Big thanks to Hyundai for sponsoring this episode.
Whoa, what is with all the ruckus? Hey, Four Eyes, you think you're cool because you drive a race car on the road?
What, this? It's the all-new Hyundai Kona N.
Yeah, well, what's the N stand for? Noisy? Yeah, buddy, keep it on the track.
All right, I'm just dropping this off.
Don't care, didn't ask. That's a pretty sharp looking compact SUV though. Very sharp. Cheese and biscuits. I wonder what it's like to drive. Carving corners and the in-corner carving differential. Getting up to speed with that peppy 8-speed wet dual-clutch transmission. Hearing the sweet song of that 280 horsepower turbo motor. Those signature crackle and pops. All while the sun shines off of the sonic blue paint. Whoa, 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 whoa. It's gotta be racing red.
Well, I like it in the sonic blue.
But it's a race car, and race cars gotta be red. Says who? The government.
Can I help you guys?
Yeah. You can, start by getting your race car out of our neighborhood.
All right.
Yeah, good riddance, huh?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Good riddance. What I would give to own one of those. Oh, what are you, crazy? Fran would never let you own a race car. Fran died this morning. You can't say that.
The purpose of adding more power to your car is pretty obvious, right? Add more horsepower and you get better neck snaps. So what's the purpose of having good suspension? Why dive into the dark world of coilovers, A-arms, and geometry? Well, because you're gonna impress your friends with sick car knowledge and maybe, just maybe, use some of this stuff when it comes to modifying your own car. Now, when we're talking race cars and lap times, your suspension is the most critical piece of the puzzle. A good suspension setup will improve the stability and handling of your car, and in the process, make your car more predictable. And when you can predict what's gonna happen, you typically end up on top. AMC, where my peeps at? Let's go to the moon. Now, your suspension is also going to help maximize the amount of grip from the tires, and when you combine all of those factors, you can spin faster lap times. And when I say suspension, I'm talking about all the components that connect your wheels to the chassis of your car. In road cars, you want soft, gushy suspension because floating on clouds is nice, but goal number one for suspension setup of a race car is not comfortability. You want a suspension setup that absorbs those bumps along a track surface, but also transmits enough feedback so you, as a driver, know what the car is doing under you. You want a balance. And to achieve that balance, you want all of your components to work together. That's the goal. So to achieve that goal, we need to figure out how each piece fits together to make the magic suspension pie. Suspension pie. Let's first talk about what most people probably think of when we're talking suspension: the shocks and the springs. Now, this is a coilover off my very own catfish, and it consists of a coil spring over a shock absorber. And its job is to carry the weight of the vehicle while absorbing shocks, and it works like this. So this part right here, this is the coil spring, and it's made out of steel, and like all springs, it stores energy so that when it's compressed, it will always want to return back to its original shape. You push down on it and it takes that force and resists it in the opposing direction. This spring is the reason why your car returns to its original height after hitting a bump or landing a sick friggin' jump. Speaking of height, the spring determines the ride height, which we'll get into later, but we need to lay some groundwork first. And if that's a problem for you, well, meet me in the Donut Underground Discord tonight, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Hit that join button down below to become a member and dish it up with me. Plus you get stickers and you get access to super sick shirts that only you can buy, like this exclusive Donut Underground members tee. Wow. Springs also limit the amount of body roll when going around corners, nose diving when you slam on the brakes, and rear squatting when you mash on the accelerator. The handling of your car is greatly affected by the springs you choose. Not only is the height of the spring important, but so is the spring rate. Spring rate is the amount of weight that's needed to compress a spring 1 inch. So let's say the spring rate of this spring is 200 pounds per inch. So it'll compress 1 inch when 200 pounds of load is placed on it. Place another 200 pounds on there and it'll compress another inch, and so on and so forth until the spring bottoms out. There are multiple types of springs as well. This is a linear spring. It has the same rate of compression at all points during its travel. You see the spacing in between the coils right here? They're the same, and that's how you know it's linear. Progressive springs get progressively stiffer the more you try to compress them. There are even dual rate springs, which are 2 different linear variations within the same spring. The top portion of the spring gives you a comfortable ride while the bottom is stiffer. I like a stiff bottom. And that's just springs in coil form. There's leaf springs, torsion bars, air spring. Regardless, their function is to carry the weight of the vehicle and to return back to original height after a force is applied to the wheels. But you want it to return to the stock height without the spring oscillating. That's it going up and down. Ba-ring. So to prevent your car from turning into a pogo stick, you need shock absorbers. Now, shock absorbers are responsible for absorbing and dampening the forces put on the system when going over bumps or smashing over a pothole. Damping, not dampening. We're not getting wet. Or are we? Responsible for absorbing and dampening the forces is what slows down the spring's oscillation. Push a spring down and let it go and it flies away like an eagle to the sea. But what if I put a spring, say, under the sea? Well, the water acts as a damper. The spring still returns to its original height, but in a smoother, more controlled fashion. And just like the sea, shock absorbers use a fluid as its material to facilitate its damping ability. Inside this cylinder are a few chambers. There's a hydraulic fluid chamber and a high pressure gas chamber. The body is a cylinder, which is this part, and at the end there's a rod and a piston, which lives in hydraulic fluid. The piston is forced up and down as you hit bumps in the road. This forces the hydraulic fluid through small holes in the piston. We call those valves. Shock use hydraulic resistance, the resistance of the fluid flowing through those holes, to damp oscillations. The bigger the bump, the harder the fluid is pushed, the more hydraulic resistance and heat that you get. But what about that gas chamber? Well, many shock absorbers contain a high pressure nitrogen gas that's there to just keep pressure on the hydraulic fluid. Now this is important because of something called cavitation. Cavitation is when the hydraulic fluid begins to foam up due to repeated rapid shocks. And once that fluid foams up, the shock is less effective at damping. You ever blow a bunch of bubbles into your milk? It's the same thing going on inside a shock. You're creating a bunch of bubbles. So that's where the high pressure nitrogen comes into play. The nitrogen pushes against the fluid, preventing it from cavitating. No foamy hydraulic fluid to mess up our damping potential. And there are 2 types of damping. There's compression and rebound. Rebound damping is damping as the suspension extends back to its normal position. Compression damping is the opposite. It's damping as the suspension compresses. The great thing about aftermarket shocks is that they offer you some adjustability. The stock shocks I have on my Catfish, they have no adjustability. The valving inside the chamber is set and it can't be changed. But we're going to put some triple adjustable shocks on the Catfish that have dials to change low speed compression, low speed rebound, and high speed rebound. These dials turn, and when I make clicker adjustments, I'm changing the hydraulic resistance by changing the size of the orifices that fluid goes through. Smaller holes, harder for the fluid to go through. Bigger holes, easier for the fluid to go through. Now with these shocks we're putting on the Catfish, I have over 20 clicks of adjustment. And we could spend an entire episode, in fact an entire series, just talking about these 3 knobs and what happens when you start fiddling with them. But I'm no fiddler. Okay, I'm an engineer, and we got more suspension components to talk about. Coilovers get all the love because, let's be honest, they're freaking shiny and they look sick. But throwing on a set of coilovers isn't going to instantly improve your lap times. Oh no. Mainly because when you put on aftermarket coilovers, like the ones we're putting on the Catfish, you start changing the geometry of the suspension. And that can often cause more harm than good. So let's look at some parts that help combat those geometrical changes. First, before we go anywhere, let's get a base vocabulary going so we're all on the same page here. There are 3 things we need to define: camber, caster, and toe. This is positive camber and negative camber. This is positive caster and negative caster. This is toe in and this is toe out. Great. Now we're all on the same page. Now the base of where all of our front suspension components mount up to is called the K-member. The K-member is part of the chassis of the car and it holds almost the entire front end. It's the part that's holding your engine, your steering rack, your control arms, which connect to your spindles, and essentially holds your entire front suspension together. It's called a K-member on the Camaro, but it's also called the front subframe, the engine cradle, same. And that K-member allows for movement of the front left and right wheels independent of each other, known as independent front suspension. Now, there are a couple types of independent front suspension. You got McPherson strut, multi-link, transverse leaf springs, but what we're gonna talk about is double wishbone, or known as short long arm. One, because it's pretty common, and two, that's what's on the Camaro. It's also what's on the Miata. So if a Miata and a Camaro use it, it must be pretty freaking good, y'all. And what makes a double wishbone setup good is that as you go into a corner and the car rolls, the suspension changes the angle of the tires to compensate for some of that roll. It's called Camber Gain. Remember, one of our goals with suspension is to maximize traction. You maximize traction by controlling the contact patch. So if I go into a corner, the contact patch changes from a nice rectangle to a triangle. As you turn, the contact patch deforms, pulling that tire away. The outer edge of the tire is doing more work than the inner because there's less contact on the inside tire. But in a double wishbone setup, we have a short and a long arm. Because of this, that wheel moves in an arc. And that arc adds negative camber, which counters the deformation of the contact patch, bringing our triangle back into a square. That's camber gain. And the more the wheels move vertically upwards, the more negative camber you get, which is gain. I know, you don't inherently think of like gain as being negative, but in this case, that's what it is. If you thought school was out, it's never out on B2B. But you know what? Learning's fun. If you don't think learning about cars is fun, while it's not perfect, a double wishbone setup is more effective at keeping more of the tire in contact with the road during cornering. Now remember when I mentioned earlier that we were re-lowering the car using shorter coil springs? Well, that causes some problems when using stock A-arms. When you lower your car, the arms, or the wishbones, they swing up in an arc, producing negative camber. On average, most cars gain about negative 0.75 degrees of camber with every inch you lower it. But too much negative camber can be bad. So how do we find that sweet spot once we drop our ride height a bit? Adjustable A-arms. So these upper A-arms, as you can see, have rod ends that get pushed in or out. Extending both rod ends equally produce a change in camber towards zero and eventually over to positive camber. Shortening both rod ends equally produces more negative camber. Negative camber not only helps the tire roll back over in the corners to increase grip, but it also increases your acceleration and top speed. So when driving in a straight line, your contact patch is reduced, which reduces rolling resistance. But on the flip side of that, because your straight line contact patch is smaller, your straight line braking is worse. I'm telling you guys, if you aren't pumped about suspension yet, you should be now. This is why suspension is so dang cool. It's a balancing act of cause and effect. And another thing you need to balance is the caster of the car. Oh, sweet transition, Jerry. Caster and camber go hand in hand, like me and French toast if French toast had hands. By moving the ball joints in the upper A-arms towards the rear of the car, and by moving the lower ball joint of the bottom arm towards the front of the car, we increase our positive caster. And having positive caster has two main benefits. The first is that we increase stability in a straight line at higher speeds. Positive caster creates a tension in the system that is always wanting to keep the wheels pointed in a straight line. Shopping carts, when you push them, they get the speed wobbles because they have negative caster, opposite of what your car has. A second benefit to positive caster is that it helps create an increased negative camber on the outside wheel during cornering. And we already know what negative camber gives us: more grip in the corner, which means more speed in the corner, which means faster lap times. Okay, so we've added some beneficial positive caster, but now there's some negative changes to the steering because of that. The dreaded bump steer. A bump steer is the unwanted toe change during wheel travel. As you hit bumps, the wheels will toe in and out based on the angle and length of your tie rods. Just like your A-arms, as the wheels travel, the tie rods swing in an arc. When the wheel moves up and down and swings in that arc, the steering rod is trying to be lengthened and shortened by this movement. But it's a fixed piece of metal. It can't do that. Jeep guys, they're familiar with this. It's just happening because they are lifting their cars, but the same thing happens when you lower yours. But it's a quick fix with a bump steer kit. It's adjustable rod ends that change the length, and then we have spacers to adjust the angle. When you do that, the toe stays consistent through the entire length of the wheel travel. Now, if you've made it this far, you might have thought, well, if like your car rolling in the corners is causing so much trouble, well, why not just like prevent that? Like having some sort of anti-roll device. You know, maybe a bar, a mechanical piece that prevents the car from swaying. Well, you are one smart cookie. Sway bars are bars that limit the amount of body roll when going around a turn by reducing the amount of weight being put on the outside tire. So if you reduce that weight shift, you have a more balanced car, which will not only handle better, but will also improve your grip. And what's cool is that we got them in the rear of the car as well. Now for our purposes, the rear of the Catfish is a bit more simple. We're working with a straight axle, which simplifies things a bit, but there are two components that will help better the handling of my beloved Camaro. The first are these weight jacks. Yeah, the Catfish is officially in a NASCAR territory. Hell yeah, brother! Woo! And weight jacks allow you to adjust the car's weight distribution by adjusting the preload on the springs. The rear coil springs fit over the weight jack like this, where there's a threaded adjuster underneath. And by turning that adjuster, you adjust the preload and effectively change the weight distribution. The Catfish is 54% front bias, 46% rear bias. So in addition to adding a lighter K-member and control arms up front, I can lower the rear a bit more to achieve a perfect 50-50% balance. The second piece in the rear is the Watts link. Now, a Watts link is a replacement for a panhard bar. Panhard bars, they reduce the lateral, that's the side-to-side movement of the rear axle when cornering. So without a panhard bar and the rear end lifted, you can see how we can push the axle side to side. You don't want that. With a panhard bar, depending on how much force you're generating during a turn, there's still a small amount of lateral deflection. A panhard bar travels on an arc as the suspension cycles through its range of motion. That's because one side of the bar is mounted to the chassis and the other to the axle. So as the rear wheel moves up and down, the axle moves up and down in that arc. And an arc has both an up and down and side to side component. And it's that side to side movement that we want to keep in check. So enter the Watts link. A Watts link takes the panhard bar a step further and eliminates that lateral movement. It uses two equal length rods and a center pivot to control axle movement. The center pivot is connected to the chassis and the links are connected to the axle housing. As the suspension travels, the pivot rotates and keeps the axle centered. And now that the lateral deflection is minimized, you get a more connected and responsive feeling in your rear end. Oh, I can feel it, it's so responsive. So that's all the principle. Let's put some of this stuff to practice. I got a bunch of sick parts from UMI Performance. We're gonna put them all on a Catfish and see how she handles. Let's go.
I'm supporting Zach while Zach supports the K-member. Your K-member. Hey Zach, how's my K-member?
It seems ready to fall out. And I think you're taking good care of it.
Do I need to lube this up any?
At this point, you might be thinking, well, hey, it looks like it's probably easier to just put more horsepower into your car. The fact of the matter is, unless you have suspension that allows you to have usable power, you're just wasting ponies. So all of this work is going to help us take the 300 plus horsepower that we have in this Catfish and be able to use all of it so that we can go faster. So the next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna put the trailing arms in and then we're gonna put in the Watts link, the piece de resistance of the rear end. What's up? Thank you. This isn't the Watts link, this is the hammer. All right, it's 6:30. We're half an hour later than what I thought we were gonna do. Not bad, pretty good. We've done a new K-member, upper and lower control arms, sway bars, new coilovers in the front, strut bar, bump steer kit. We got subframe connectors. We got a Watts link in the back. We got weight jacks in the back. We got rear sway bars, lateral links, and I have 4 new best friends. So now it's the fun part. We got all this freaking grease and dirt on our fingers, in between our fingernails. It's time to clean up, put on a nice tuxedo, and go take this thing out to the streets and see if all these wonderful UMI parts is really gonna help the Catfish improve her lap times. What do you think? All right, so we got the Catfish aligned last night, had a guy come out and align the car and quarter balance it. So now I got it out on the road and instantly you can tell that this thing is stiff. It's way stiff. It has much stiffer springs in the front and rear. It's a little bumpy. It's got race car feels to it. It's, you know, it's definitely more noise, and anytime you hit a bump like that, you can definitely feel it and you can hear it. My Catfish made some pretty good noises even before I had this on, so now it makes even more race car noises. What
which is pretty sick. So the real test of all these parts is gonna come when we go out to Willow Springs. We've rented the entire track, Streets of Willow. We're gonna take the catfish out and we're gonna compare it to lap times that I did when I went out there in a previous time without any of these mods on it. So we're gonna see how she does. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of B2B. Thanks Zach, Job, and Adam for helping us put all these parts on here, and of course Rami and Lance from UMI Performance. If you're interested in checking them out, hit the link down below. You can go look at their YouTube page, go get some parts for your car. They got a whole ton of stuff that you can get at umiperformance.com. UMI has their own motorsports park. They have this event called King of the Mountain. They've invited me out there to go do it in the catfish. Maybe you'll see me out there next year. It's Donut Motorsports. Wouldn't that be pretty sick? If you want to see more of the catfish build, hit that like button, put a comment down below. That helps us out. Follow us on Instagram at Donut Media. Follow me at Jeremiah Burton. And until next week, bye for now. Oh, someone waved at me. Aww, they saw me waving. What a sweet person. Oh, get it. Hell yeah. Man, this thing is sick.